The Cataclysm of Rome, Part 2, The Origins of Islam. Welcome, it's Bible Scribe. Thank you for joining me in this video once again. This is the second part in a four-part series called The Cataclysm of Rome. In it, we're going to break apart your understanding of Islam. We're going to go through the history, but then we're going to talk about some lesser-known details that may shed some immense light on who Muhammad was, what Islam was, why was it started, what did it become, and then what did it do, what was its role in history. It's of immense importance to our understanding of our historical narrative, even our timeline, our chronology. So thank you for joining me. I think you're going to get a lot out of this. The Life of Mohammed. We're going to go through just a few details on Muhammad's life so you get an understanding. He was born in the year 569 AD. His mother died when he was very young. His father had already died before his birth, so he was, for all intents and purposes, an orphan. When we actually try to dig into Muhammad's genealogy, we actually have a lot of issues. As far as scholars are concerned, his genealogy is in question. A silk merchant informs us this: the people of Banu Fuhariya came to the Prophet and said to him, "You belong to us." And he replied, "Verily, the Archangel Gabriel has informed me that I belong to Mudar." So this seems to indicate that as far as Muhammad was concerned, or the traditions of Muhammad were concerned, that his genealogy was told to him. According to this account, the people of the tribe Banu Fahara did not know that Muhammad was a descendant of Mudar, and that Muhammad was informed by Gabriel not through common knowledge. Muslim historians trace Muhammad through a man named Adnan, who was said to have been a descendant of Ishmael. Of course, scholarship in general has had a very hard time proving that. Now, it's important to know that, of course, prior to Muhammad's revelations from the angel Gabriel, that he was an idolater. And here's a statement about that from researcher Guillaume in his book Islam. It says this: "I was told that the apostle of Allah said, as he was talking about Zaid, son of Amir, son of Nufail, he was the first to upbraid me for idolatry and forbade me to worship idols." And the interesting thing about this type of account is that the Muslims claim that Muhammad never had committed idolatry, even before the revelations of the angel. As a young man in his 20s, Muhammad found and married Khadija. He entered her service at the age of 25. Now, she was 15 years older than him. She was 40 years old. And this would have been in 594 AD when he met her. When he began to serve her in her caravan, she then looked on him and decided she was going to marry him, and she proposed to Muhammad. Now, it's interesting again that that practice is now banned in Islam for women to propose to men. However, that is what happened in this case. Now, if we move forward a few years, in general, Muhammad's life when he was married to Khadija was quite peaceful, according to the records. And it says that he spent much time in solitude in the caves and mountains surrounding Mecca. He would go off for a night or a time and spend time alone near these caves and mountains, and then return to his wife, Khadija. And it was during his time in one of these caves that the angel Gabriel is said to have come to him and began to reveal the Quran to him. This was at age 40, in about 610 AD, that Muhammad started receiving these revelations from the angel Gabriel, and Khadija was said to have been the first person to believe in him, his own wife. The story of the revelation of the angel goes something like this: that Muhammad was camping out in the cave of Hira when an angel appeared to him. The angel presents the text of the Quran and commands Muhammad to read. Well, Muhammad refuses to do so because he does not know how. And the angel responds by pressing hard against him and repeating the command. And this happens 3 different times. Then, of course, without reading anything, Muhammad leaves the cave and returns to Khadija, his wife, at home. When he returns to his wife, he is sickly and afraid, and he says to her, "I am afraid that something may happen to me." Khadija tells him, "No, you must keep good relations with kin, help the poor, serve your guests generously, and help the afflicted." Khadija then takes Muhammad to her cousin Waraka, who was supposedly a Christian and was able to read and write Hebrew, but had lost his eyesight in his old age. Muhammad then relates the appearance of Gabriel to Waraka, Khadija's cousin. And Waraka confirms that it was the angel Gabriel and warns Muhammad that he will be driven out of the land by his people for what he has seen and heard. A few days later, Waraka dies. At the same time, the revelations for Muhammad pause. Sometime later on, Muhammad was walking, and a voice from the sky speaks to him. He looks up and sees the same angel as before, sitting in a chair in the air, and Muhammad once again becomes afraid and flees back home to his wife. He wraps himself up in blankets, still in fear, and then, supposedly, Allah reveals verses of the Quran to him, saying, "Arise and warn the people against Allah's punishment and desert the idols." After this, it is said that these revelations came regularly to Muhammad. And this is all paraphrased from the writing called the Sahih Bukhari. Muhammad is said to have continued to receive revelations for 13 years after this point, and he is said to have fought or led in 66 different battles to spread Islam to neighboring tribes and areas. The most important of these battles, of course, is his conquest of Mecca itself, his hometown, in 630 AD. It is said that he visited the Kaaba and cleared it of all idols and images except those of Abraham, Jesus, and Mary. He completed the circumambulation, the circling of the Kaaba, on his horse, and then took the key to the Kaaba himself. His soldiers then forced the conversion of all at Mecca, executing those that did not convert. Now, to focus just a little bit more in on this cousin of Khadija, the cousin of Muhammad's wife, by the name of Waraka, he was said to have been a Nestorian monk, a Christian Nestorian monk. Now, it's interesting, I found in my studies that it is actually questionable whether he was actually a Nestorian monk or whether it was simply that he had met a monk named Nestor. Now, the beliefs of Nestorianism come from a Christian named Nestorius, but he had been dead almost a century before this time period. So, even though we see in history that according to the records that Muhammad had traveled to Syria and met Waraka and also met a monk named Nestor, that this does not necessarily mean that Waraka was a Nestorian monk, but he was Christian for sure, and in a sense, Catholic Christian. Now, in the supporting writings, we see a little bit more about Waraka's Christianity, and in the sources it says this. It says, Aisha said, "The Prophet returned to Khadija while his heart was beating rapidly. She took him to Waraka bin Nawfal, who was a Christian convert and used to read the Gospel in Aramaic. Waraka asked the Prophet, 'What do you see?' And when he told him, Waraka said, 'That is the same angel whom Allah sent to the Prophet Moses. Should I live till you receive the divine message, that I will support you strongly.'" So you see in this traditional story that Waraka was the one that told Muhammad who he was talking to in these visions. And what we're going to find out is that Waraka, having experience with Hebrew, that he also was instrumental in telling Muhammad or helping him understand what he was hearing. So with that knowledge about this cousin who was very instrumental when it came to these visions that Muhammad had, let's move forward. Muhammad actually passed away at age 63. This was after his wife Khadija had already died, but this was in 632 AD. And I found it interesting that he was actually poisoned by a Jewish woman, and that's how he died in the end. Here's a text that talks about this from a man named Abdallah Abd al-Fadi called Is the Quran Infallible? It says, Then Muhammad sent for this Jewess and asked her, Have you poisoned this lamb? She said, You have acquired certain powers with which you judge those who are not loyal to you. You killed my father, my uncle, and my brother. So I said, If he is a king, then I would be relieving us of him. And if he is a prophet, he will be able to perceive. It was said that he pardoned her, while others say he commanded her to be put to death and crucified. But when Muhammad fell ill just before his death, he said to Aisha, Aisha, I still feel the effect of the poisoned food I ate. This is the time of my demise by that poison. So I feel that it is actually a good point. If this is what truly happened, and he was truly the prophet of God, was he not able to detect the poison that killed him? Against the Bible. Now, just to clear the air, the Muslim faith has a few major problems with the Bible, so we'll air those here. Islam is simply incompatible with the Bible. For instance, Zechariah in chapter 13 says that there would be no more prophets after Jesus Christ, after the Messiah. It says in verses 2 through 5, that it shall come to pass in that day, said the Lord of hosts, that I will cut off the names of the idols out of the land, and they shall no more be remembered. I also will cause the prophets, an unclean spirit, to pass out of the land. And it shall come to pass that when any shall yet prophesy, then his fathers and his mother that begat him shall say unto him, Thou shalt not live, for thou speakest lies in the name of the Lord. And his father and his mother that begat him shall thrust him through when he prophesieth. And it shall come to pass in that day that the prophets shall be ashamed, every one of his vision. When he hath prophesied, neither shall they wear a rough garment to deceive. But he shall say, I am no prophet, I am a husbandman, for man taught me to keep cattle from my youth. So you see a picture of prophets no longer prophesying and, in fact, being afraid of prophesying after the time of the Messiah, which we know already occurred when Jesus came. And of course, Zechariah speaks to when that would happen. In chapter 12, verse 2, it says, Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege, both against Judah and against Jerusalem. So we see after the siege of Jerusalem, which obviously happened in 70 AD, at the hand of the Romans, that there could never be another prophet. However, Muslims call Muhammad the seal of the prophets, claiming that he is the final prophet from God or Allah. The God of the Bible, however, obviously does not agree. Muslims also tend to defend their faith by referring to the Bible, which is of course a collection of Jewish and Christian Gentile texts. So it's important to recognize that that's the equivalent of myself as a Christian using the Quran to justify my Christian positions. It's really nonsense. For instance, Muslims retranslate Isaiah 9:6, saying that when it says, Unto us a child is born, and unto us a son is given, whose government is on his shoulder, that it is referring to Muhammad. They say that this does not refer to the Jewish Messiah, as the Jews have claimed, of course, for millennia, but that it is mistranslated by the originators of the texts, the Jews. They say the government is on his shoulder really means that the sign of prophecy is on his shoulder. And they continue to explain that Allah supernaturally put a seal of prophecy on Muhammad, referring to a large birthmark that is alleged to have been between his shoulders on his back. So we see that in almost every sense, the fundamental tenets of Islam regarding Muhammad are antithetical to what's in the Bible itself. The Gods of Mecca. In regards to Allah, scholars believe that Allah was the tribal deity of the Quraysh, the people that originally lived in Mecca. The name was spoken in that time as Al-Ilya. Hubal was another name for the ancient god who was said to have been the chief god worshipped at Mecca, centuries before Islam. He was the god of the moon. The Kaaba was officially dedicated to Hubal before Muhammad cleansed it. Hubal is the same as Baal, and both words mean the same thing as Allah or the god. Herodotus in 450 BC said that they, the Arabians, believe in no other god except Dionysus and the heavenly Aphrodite. And they say that they wear their hair as Dionysus does his, cutting it round the head and shaving the temples. They call Dionysus Orotalt and Aphrodite Alilat. Brewer's Dictionary of Phrase and Fable, published in 1870, says that this name Orotalt derives from a corruption of the phrase Allah Ta'ala, which means God exalted. And Plutarch in 100 AD said that Osiris and Dionysus were identical, linking Allah to Dionysus and then Osiris. The Arabian word al-Ilah is the equivalent to Osiris, Bacchus, Dionysus, Adonis, and Zeus. While the wife of this god, the goddess Allat, is equivalent to Isis, Aphrodite, and Venus. The ancient moon god of the Mesopotamian culture was a female deity named Sin, or Inanna, and her consort was the god of agriculture named Tammuz. The title of this moon god Sin was Al-Ilah, which means the deity or the god, same as the name Allah. And this means that he was the chief god among the Arabians' 360 other gods. Carlton S. Kuhn, professor, anthropologist, and author, says, quote, "The god Il or Ilah was originally a phase of the moon god." Now we have three goddesses that were also worshipped in Arabia and in Mecca, called Al-Lat, Al-Uzza, and Al-Manat. These three goddesses were considered female, and human sacrifice was known to have been made to them in ancient history. The Quraysh, who lived in Mecca, used to chant as they circumambulated the Kaaba, saying, Al-Lat and Al-Uzza and Manat the third, the other, indeed these are exalted, let us hope for their intercession. This is spoken of by F.E. Peters in his book, The Hajj. And we see if we read the original verses of the Quran that these three goddesses were mentioned as Allah's daughters. Muhammad himself commanded his followers originally to offer prayers to Allah's daughters. The Quran once read, "Signs of his Lord, the greatest, have ye seen Lat and Uzza and another, the third goddess, Manat. Verily they are the most exalted females, whose intercession is to be sought." Well, this second line that says they should seek the intercession of these goddesses was actually removed from the Quran. According to tradition, Muhammad was tricked by Satan into adding that verse to the Quran. Though it was initially accepted by Muslims, Muhammad said that he had a revelation from Allah that the verse should be removed. He repented of the error, and it was removed from the Quran at that time. Some Muslims now say that this never happened. Early wars and conquests. The early years of Islam, after Muhammad had his revelations, were full of many bloodthirsty battles. Here's a map of the Byzantine Empire prior to Islam. And here is the area where the Quraysh people of Mecca lived. Note here the Persian Empire of the Sassanids also. Here is the Byzantine Empire. And here is the locations of the Gothics and barbarians who had taken over Italy. During the life of Muhammad, all the battles of Islam were against neighboring tribes to convert the Arabs to Islam. In 624, Muhammad led a raid for booty and plunder against a Meccan caravan, killing 70 Meccans for mere material gain. In 630 AD to 632 AD, Muslims, on at least one occasion led by Muhammad himself, had conquered the bulk of Western Arabia and southern Palestine through approximately a dozen separate invasions and bloody conquests. In 632 AD, after Muhammad's death, the new Muslim caliph, Abu Bakr, launched Islam into an almost 1,500 years, according to our conventional histories, of continual imperialist, colonialist, bloody conquest and subjugation of others through invasion and war, a role that Islam has continued in some form from that time to the modern day. In 638 AD, Muslims captured Jerusalem and the Levant. At times, the caliphs engaged in triumphalist gestures like building the famous Dome of the Rock Mosque, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, in Jerusalem between 690 and 692 AD on the site of the Second Jewish Temple. Now, of course, the temple had been destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, but the use of Roman and Sasanian symbols of power on the mosque suggests that its purpose was partly to celebrate the Arab victories over the two empires. In 642 AD, the Muslims effectively conquered northern Egypt. In 652 AD, the Muslims went to war on the sea through their naval abilities and started to conquer the Mediterranean areas and coastline. In 721 AD, the Muslims had conquered the area of Spain as we know it. In 750 AD, the Caliph destroyed the walls of Jerusalem, leaving it absolutely defenseless. So with all of these conquests, you see how the Muslim empire spread. Not just over Saudi Arabia, but over the Persian Empire, and now through most of the Eastern Roman Empire, and starting to bleed into the areas of the Western Roman Empire. The Hajj and the Kaaba. One of the key practices of the Muslims that will become more important later on in the video is the Hajj. The Hajj is the annual Islamic pilgrimage to Mecca, Saudi Arabia, the holiest city for Muslims. Hajj is a mandatory religious duty for Muslims that must be carried out at least once in their lifetime by all adult Muslims who are physically capable of undertaking the journey and of supporting their family during their absence from home. The Muslim pilgrims circumambulate or walk around the Kaaba 7 times, counterclockwise. This is called tawaf in their language. Some scholars say that the 7 circuits around the Kaaba represent the paths of the planets in the sky. Again, this is an interesting detail that may become important as we move through this study further. Religious anomalies. There seem to be a lot of anomalies with this story, particularly around the religion and its practices. So let's go through a few of those now. First, why would there be this emphasis in the story of Muhammad on his ability to read? He was illiterate as far as we know. So the story tends to emphasize the reading. It says the angel commanded him to read. And then we also have Waraka, the cousin, who was fully able to read Hebrew, and then also to write Hebrew. If Muhammad was illiterate, it seems safe to assume that he could neither read nor write. And so for him to be able to receive these revelations and then write them down seems to be a little far-fetched. Second, Khadijah's response to her husband when he comes back from seeing this angel the first time seems strange. It seems forced, perhaps. She tells him to help the poor and help the afflicted. It seems to be a strange response to give someone who is scared because they saw a specter in a cave. Third, Waraka, Khadijah's cousin, is a Christian. So why did they visit him right away when they saw this angel? What reason would a couple of pagan idol worshippers like Muhammad and his wife Khadijah have to visit a Christian Hebrew scribe to get insight on a spiritual manifestation in a cave? Fourth, Waraka is apparently an expert in Hebrew, but it is not mentioned that he either helped Muhammad translate the revelations or that he taught Muhammad to read and write so he could do it himself. Fifth, connecting Christianity to this story seems suspect in general. Was it perhaps added to the story for it to gain sympathy from the Christians for this new religion? Now, there's some more interesting history around the Kaaba itself, because history tells us that when Muhammad was 35 years old, this would be 5 years before the revelations of the angel, that a flood swept into Mecca, where he lived, and ruined the Kaaba, so much so that it had to be demolished. The entire Quraysh people actually helped rebuild it, and then the black stone of the eastern corner of the Kaaba was built back into it. It was said to have been 6 inches high and 8 inches wide, and of reddish-black color, and that it was of volcanic origin. Now, I know that most of the tradition and the sayings around this black stone of the Kaaba say that it was a meteorite. However, the history records say that it was volcanic. And Muhammad was actually said to have led the placing of this stone in the Kaaba. So this reinforces the paganness of Muhammad and his devotion to the Kaaba and everything it stood for. So as we said, Muhammad did not receive the Quran from the angel until he was 40 years old. He lived his entire life in the presence of the Kaaba and even helped rebuild it when it was destroyed by the flood. So why did he keep the Kaaba after his revelations from the angel? Why did he keep the black stone? If they were able to take over Mecca after the angel's revelations, why did they keep these relics of their pagan past? If he knew it was a pagan building, why didn't he have it destroyed? Let's talk a little bit about the symbols of Islam, particularly the moon, because as you can see on the flag of Islam, this is their main symbol, the moon with a star accompanying it. This is quite similar to some of the ancient pagan idols and iconography that we see both from Arabia and other Mesopotamian religions. For instance, this bull, an idol of the ancient pagan god Baal, with a sun disk in the middle of his horns. Now the moon, the crescent moon used by the Muslims, looks exactly like this bull's horns. And the disk in the middle represents the sun. So here we have an ancient pagan idol that represents the same symbol as Islam with the addition of the sun. This disk is actually called the black sun, and it is eclipsing the moon, which produces the crescent moon that we see in the iconography. The horns and the disk together make this moon eclipse. These symbols together are also seen as phallic and symbols of fertility, the sun disk being the male aspect and the moon crescent being the female or receiving aspect. And these ideas are not made up by any means. Ancient Sumerian texts that include the love poem of the consummation of Inanna and Tammuz, or Lilith and Dagon, say this: "My vulva, the horn, the boat of heaven, is full of eagerness like the young moon. Wild bull Dumuzi, or Tammuz, make your milk sweet and thick. I will drink your fresh milk. Let the milk of the goat flow in my sheepfold. Fill my holy churn with honey cheese." This confirms for us that Tammuz was Baal, the bull of heaven, and the consort of the goddess named Ishtar, Lilith, Isis, Venus. So we see these symbols, the moon and the sun. Islam is, of course, moon-based, based on its iconography. Then we ask ourselves, what modern religion is sun-based? And I would propose that if we take a close look at Catholic iconography, we see that it is full of sun symbolism. And we will go further into this sun symbolism in the next part of this 4-part series. But for now, we'll leave that where it is. So who is the sun and the moon from the ancient religions? Well, the sun in Mesopotamian and Babylonian religion is Utu, or Shamash, and Tammuz. And in Egypt, this was Ra. And in Greek and Roman religion, this was Apollo, or Zeus. Now the moon was, in Mesopotamian religion, Sin or Inanna. And in Babylonian, it was Ishtar, Ashtoreth, or Lilith. In Egypt, this was Isis. In Greek, this was Aphrodite. And in Roman times, it was Venus. You can note that both of these gods had progressed through all the ancient religions to the time of the beginnings of Islam and were preserved perfectly in the gods of both Greek and Roman culture. These gods were the gods that were worshipped in Rome prior to and during the time when the Catholic Church was also founded. Apollyon was even mentioned in the book of Revelation. Revelation 9:11 says, "And they had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon, but in the Greek tongue hath his name Apollyon." Another very unique feature of the practice of Islam that we need to explore further is the Hajj, or this pilgrimage that's made to Mecca each year. And of particular interest to us is the circumambulation of the Muslims around the Kaaba. What is interesting about this is that it is actually not so unique to Islam as it may seem at first glance. In the Catholic Church, we actually have priests sometimes circumambulating an altar while incensing it with a thurible. And this is done to prepare that altar for ceremonial worship. Usually on the altar are placed relics of a saint or images and statues of either Jesus or Mary. Most often the altar is circled 3 times, supposedly to represent the Trinity. In the Coptic tradition, during the liturgy, the priest circles the altar while an acolyte, or an altar boy, holds a cross high on the opposite side of the altar. This could be thought of to represent the 2 bodies circling the center, the sun and the moon circling the altar. The Catholic Church even does a circumambulation ceremony around the supposed tomb of Jesus Christ. This is a video of them doing the circumambulation ritual around the supposed tomb of Christ in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. And note the participants here, because it reflects exactly what we saw with the Muslim pilgrims as far as their dress, both in the Catholic circumambulation and in the Muslim circumambulation. We see the participants dressed in white and black. Now, if you know much about those colors, the intent behind those colors, you know that that leads us directly to Freemasonry. And if we look in the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert Mackey from 1882, we see that the rite of circumambulation is described in detail. It says, "Circumambulation is the name given by sacred archaeologists to that religious rite in ancient initiations, which consisted in a formal procession around the altar or other holy and consecrated object. The same rite exists in Freemasonry. In ancient Greece, when the priests were engaged in the rite of sacrifice, they and the people always walked 3 times around the altar while singing a sacred hymn. In making this procession, great care was taken to move in imitation of the course of the sun. For this purpose, they commenced at the east and passed on by the way of the south to the west, and thence by the north they arrived at the east again." So we see from this account that the Freemasons used circumambulation as a tool in their ritual purposes, just as Islam does. And you can see this image, which is a Masonic instructional page that shows how to do the circumambulation during the Masonic ritual in the temples. It forces the question, is this Muslim practice of circumambulation around the Kaaba perhaps not an actual meaningful ritual from a unique religion, but instead a ritual of acknowledgement and recognition with the roots of the religion, in obeisance to the gods they serve, the sun and moon gods of ancient Babylon, or something possibly even darker? Another interesting thought that comes to mind is that in ancient Sumerian religion and Hermeticism, that Saturn was called the Black Sun. Saturn is often represented by a black cube in esoteric religion. So you can see the apparent relationship between the black cube of the Kaaba and the ancient Sumerian religion. We also see the black cube pop up in some other places. The Jewish tefillin, the black square design of the graduation hat, the sculptures of black cubes seen all over the world, and the black cube used in esoteric and Luciferian ritual. This cube-shaped altar is based on a design by Aleister Crowley. The black cube itself is said to represent Saturn, or the material world, or even Tartarus and hell itself. But is this connection to ancient pagan religion because of Mohammed, or was it possibly brought into the development of Islam by an outside influence? Let's explore this further. The Catholic connection. Now, a lot of my material for this section of the video comes from a book called The Life of Mohammed by Sir William Muir. It was originally published in 1819. In this book, Sir William Muir explains that the Kaaba was worshipped by the majority of Arabians, not just those in Mecca, and that Christianity and Judaism were also well known throughout all of Arabia. He says the New Testament was known and revered by most, even Arabs, as sacred, holy, and true. Most Arabs, he says, were not Christian and participated in the worship of the gods of Arabia and the Kaaba. At age 12, Muhammad was said to have traveled to Syria with his uncle Abu Talib and met Christians there. Also in his youth, he attended what was called the Fair of Conquests, where many Christian representatives were proselytizing for the gospel. Also, many Jews were there, teaching out of the Torah. A number of different religions were there. So Muhammad was exposed to Christianity, Judaism, and of course his native Arabian polytheism. Now, at 25 years old, as we said, Muhammad accompanies his uncle again, Abu Talib, to Syria. On this trip, he meets his future wife, Khadija, who was 15 years older than he was at age 40. Now, Muslims claim that also at the city of Basra that he met a monk named Nestorius, or Nestor, as we mentioned, that told Muhammad that he was the coming prophet. Most scholars, actually, who have dug into this story, see it as a false contrivance of the religion. Muhammad also had a slave named Zaid that he cared greatly for. And Zaid was a Christian whose mother was killed by the Arabs. Muhammad ended up adopting Zaid as a son. And Zaid's father's and mother's tribes that he had come from were also decidedly Christian tribes. Now, when we come to Khadija, Muhammad's wife, she was very wealthy. Her father was a commander in the Arab wars of the time, a commander of the Quraysh armies. The Quraysh were the people of Mecca. So Khadija's father was very instrumental and politically powerful in Mecca. Khadija's cousin, not Waraka, but Uthman, had embraced Christianity also at Constantinople and had made an attempt to gain the rule over all of Mecca. Uthman was also involved in politics, and his faith was associated with his attempt to control Mecca with Byzantine backing, the backing of the Byzantine Empire, the Roman Empire. His mother was also likely an Ethiopian Christian. In 590 AD, he sought intervention from the Byzantine Empire in an attempt to have himself installed as king of Mecca and to bring its inhabitants under the Abrahamic religions. His attempt to gain control of Mecca occurred during Khadijah's marriage to Muhammad and possibly was made in conjunction with the Hijra, which was Muhammad's journey to Medina after he was ostracized from Mecca. Khadijah's cousin Waraka was also a Christian, and he knew the Jewish and Christian scriptures, having copied them down in Hebrew. And note that Arab Christians didn't use Hebrew at this time. They used the Syriac language and had copies of the scriptures in Syriac, but not Hebrew. Waraka at one time actually had proposed to Khadijah. Yes, Khadijah's cousin Waraka had proposed to her, but the marriage never occurred. And then, of course, she ended up marrying Muhammad. It is said that the early surahs of the Quran were actually recorded by Waraka and Khadijah. They were instrumental in the recording of the surahs. Muhammad himself wrote almost none of the revealed information. Of course, he was illiterate, so it makes sense. Also very lacking as far as the writings was Muhammad ever writing anything about what happened before the Quran was received. He doesn't write anything about the receiving of the Quran. That actually was recorded by other people. When Muhammad would stay near these caves where he received the visions, he always returned to his wife Khadijah. When he received the revelations from Gabriel, he then returned to his wife Khadijah. When he wanted confirmation of the angel's message, he returned to his wife Khadijah. Khadijah died 10 years after the revelations of Gabriel, at 65 years old, when Muhammad was still 50. Abu Talib, Muhammad's uncle, who had taken him on those trips to Syria to see the Christians, actually died in the same year. And because of Khadijah's death, many Muslims actually turned away from Islam at that time. Interesting that she was so instrumental in the religion that when she passed, many Muslims left the religion. The Battle of Badr in 624 AD was between Muhammad and the Meccan Quraysh people, the people of Mecca, his hometown. Abu Bakr succeeded Muhammad in 632 when he died, and he was also Quraysh from the city of Mecca. Abu Bakr is credited with starting the war campaigns that gave Islam control over all of Arabia and started invasions into both Persia and the Roman Byzantine Empire. Abu Bakr is actually also credited for the compilation of the Quran, of which he had a personal caliphal codex. A man named Umar was nominated by Abu Bakr as his successor in 634 AD. This man was also Quraysh, born in Mecca. Umar initially opposed Muhammad. He later converted and also had pledged allegiance to Abu Bakr. He then takes over as Caliph of Islam and leads it to conquer the Sasanian Persian Empire and 2/3 of the Byzantine Empire of Rome. Then I found in my research something that pretty much sealed everything in stone for me, helped me understand and put everything together. I found a research paper by a lady named Ghada Osman of San Diego State University. And the name of this research paper was Arab Converts to Islam in Pre-Islamic Mecca. And the paper says this, that in about 570 AD, and this is years before Muhammad had his revelations, that 4 men in 570 AD had made a pact to renounce the prevalent idolatry of Mecca and had set out to seek the true religion. This pact occurred in Mecca, and the men that were involved in this pact were none other than Khadijah's 2 cousins, Waraka and Uthman, along with Zaid, Amir, Nufail, and Ubayd al-Jash. These 4 men made a pact to change the religion of their hometown Mecca. In this article, based on the sources that Ghada Osman found, she says that Uthman, Khadijah's cousin, went to the Caesar of the Byzantine Empire and became a Christian and raised his status with the Caesar. But hungry for power, Uthman convinced the Caesar to annex Mecca into the Byzantine Empire and then make him its ruler. Then Uthman returned to Mecca and tried to persuade the Quraysh and Meccan people to relinquish their independence and submit to Caesar. It seems that in every sense that Khadijah and her two cousins, Uthman and Waraka, and their two pact members were all of one mind in regards to the religious and political future of Mecca at the time of Muhammad. All the indications are that these were all Christians, and not just any Christianity, but the Christianity of the Caesar, Roman Catholic Christianity. This may not make a lot of sense to you yet, seeing how Mecca became a completely Muslim city, but we will speak more on this in just a moment. Based on these obvious connections between the wife of Muhammad and the Catholic Church, we can now look for other things in Islam that show a connection between Islam and the Catholic Church. One thing that we do notice is that when we see mosques in cities all around the world, oftentimes we see Catholic cathedrals right next to them. And they haven't been torn down or destroyed through the warfare of the Nation of Islam. They stand next to each other without issue. Then we also need to recognize that the symbols of Islam in many ways match the symbols of the Catholic Church. For instance, the standard of the Roman legion, if you remember, is an eagle. The crest of the Seljuk Turks, who were Muslims. The crest of the Byzantine Empire that we just spoke about is the double eagle. The crest of the Empire of Nicaea, the location of the Council of Nicaea, is the double eagle. The double eagle is also used in Freemasonry on the apron of practitioners. And the crest is, of course, used by the Vatican itself. The connections of Islam to all these other religions, including Catholicism, but also the ancient pagan religions, seem rather obvious. But what is just as important in our research is, what did the religion of Islam accomplish? What was it set about to do? Beginning around 1000 AD, according to our modern chronologies, Islam began to attack Christianity specifically. Between 970 AD and 983 AD, and then again in 1024 to 1077 AD, the Muslims destroyed the countryside of Israel, ravaged it. In 1003 AD, the Muslims went through the Holy Land destroying Christian churches, sometimes at the direct order of the Caliph. In the 1020s, they literally built mosques on top of the Christian churches in the places they conquered, and they attacked and robbed Christian pilgrims from Europe. One thing we need to realize now is that we are nearing the time frame that would have been considered the end of the 1,000 years since Christ. This means that according to the book of Revelation, this was the time frame when Satan was loosed to deceive the nations once more. It is interesting that as this time frame passed, that it was the time when Islam directed its sole focus on attacking Christianity specifically. Here is a video of the Muslim attacks that happened over the years, all throughout the Mediterranean and Europe. According to our history books, Islam continued to wage war in the Western world for 1,000 years. Based on my research, though, I now dispute this time frame and chronology, but some of that will be still to come in the fourth part of this series, where we discuss timelines and chronology. Conclusions. Despite the claims of the natural, humble beginnings for Muhammad and his marriage to Khadija, and the revelations he supposedly received from Angel Gabriel, and the start of this new religion, I feel that there is a lot more at work here. I think that it is hinted at by these things. The fact that Muhammad was an orphan and could be manipulated. Khadija and Waraka's connections to the Catholic Church. The lack of any purifying of the pagan Kaaba after Muhammad's revelations. He still let it stand right in the center of Mecca. The main symbol of Islam being a moon, which ties it directly to the pagan gods prevalent in Arabia before Muhammad's revelations. The similarities of Islam's practices to Catholicism, Freemasonry, and ancient pagan religions. The fact that the regions that Islam conquered in the first 100 years of its history were inhabited predominantly by non-Roman Catholic but nonetheless Christian peoples. The same Christian areas that had fought against the Roman Catholic Church, the same areas that were inhabited by the, quote, barbarian invaders that had decimated Roman rule in the Mediterranean, the same areas that fought against the Council of Nicaea and the Trinitarian dogma. These were the first areas to be overrun by hordes of scimitar-wielding Muslims in the name of Al-Ilya, or Hubal, or Dionysus, or Osiris, Baal. Then the most interesting piece of information of all, for me, was this strange pact between Khadija's cousins and their Roman Catholic counterparts. Was this pact to bring Mecca to Christianity, or could it have turned into something else? Did Uthman's pleading with the Caesar to gain power in Mecca turn into a bargaining chip for the Caesar? Did the Caesar promise Uthman wealth or power, perhaps, in return for helping him build a new army of zealots underneath the thumb of the Roman Catholic Empire that could help corral Christianity back into the hands of Rome? This new religion, I believe, was built by Rome through this dirty deal with these Arabs, desperate for power. Rome was also desperate to regain control of the lands lost to the Germanic invaders, the Christians. And as Muhammad was illiterate, I truly believe that Khadija and Waraka did not receive the surahs from Muhammad, but instead gave them to Muhammad. Waraka, Khadija, and the others crafted this religion from the ground up at the request of the Caesar and in exchange for control of Mecca. Islam became one of the most ruthless and successful armies the world has ever known in terms of conquests. The armies of Islam conquered back all the lands that were lost by the Roman Empire during the barbarian invasions. The simple fact that the Al-Aqsa Mosque now sits in the middle of Jerusalem to this day is proof of its effectiveness. All these postulates may seem outlandish to you, but there is actually a testimony from an ex-Jesuit priest who actually became a true Christian. His name was Alberto Rivera. I had known about Alberto's testimony, but I hadn't really read it through until I had finished all the research that we have talked about. And amazingly, he confirms all of my suspicions about Islam in his testimony as follows. And these are selected excerpts from the testimony. What I'm going to tell you is what I learned in secret briefings in the Vatican when I was a Jesuit priest under oath and induction. A Jesuit cardinal named Augustine B. showed us how desperately the Roman Catholics wanted Jerusalem at the end of the 3rd century. Because of its religious history and strategic location, the Holy City was considered a priceless treasure. A scheme had to be developed to make Jerusalem a Roman Catholic city. The great untapped source of manpower that could do this job was the children of Ishmael. The poor Arabs fell victim to one of the most clever plans ever devised by the powers of darkness. The only way Satan could stop this thrust was to create a counterfeit Christian religion to destroy the work of God. The solution was in Rome. Their religion had come from ancient Babylon and all it needed was a facelift. The great counterfeit religion was Roman Catholicism, called Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. Somehow, though, the Vatican had to create a weapon to eliminate both the Jews and the true Christian believers who refused to accept Roman Catholicism. Looking to North Africa, they saw multitudes of Arabs as a source of manpower to do their dirty work. Some Arabs had become Roman Catholic and could be used in reporting information to leaders in Rome. Others were used in an underground spy network to carry out Rome's master plan to control the great multitudes of Arabs who rejected Catholicism. The Vatican wanted to create a Messiah for the Arabs, someone they could raise up as a great leader, a man with charisma who they could train, and eventually unite all non-Catholic Arabs behind him, creating a mighty army that would ultimately capture Jerusalem for the Pope. A wealthy Arabian lady who was a faithful follower of the Pope played a tremendous part in this drama. She was a widow named Khadijah. She gave her wealth to the church and retired to a convent, but was given an assignment. She was to find a brilliant young man who could be used by the Vatican to create a new religion and become the Messiah for the children of Ishmael. Khadijah had a cousin named Waraka, who also was a very faithful Roman Catholic, and the Vatican placed him in a critical role as Muhammad's advisor. He had tremendous influence on Muhammad. Teachers were sent to young Muhammad, and he had intensive training. Muhammad studied the works of St. Augustine, which prepared him for his great calling. The Vatican had Catholic Arabs across North Africa spread the story of a great one who was about to rise up among the people and be the chosen one of their God. Muhammad began receiving divine revelations, and his wife's Catholic cousin Waraka helped interpret them. From this came the Quran. Muhammad later conquered Mecca, and the Kaaba was cleared of idols. History proves that before Islam came into existence, the Sabaeans in Arabia worshipped the moon god who was married to the sun god. They gave birth to the three goddesses who were worshipped throughout the Arab world as daughters of Allah. An idol excavated at Hazor in Palestine in the 1950s shows Allah sitting on a throne with the crescent moon on his chest. By the time Muhammad died, the religion of Islam was exploding. The nomadic Arab tribes were joining forces in the name of Allah and his prophet Muhammad. When Cardinal B shared with us in the Vatican, he said, "These writings were guarded because they contain information that links the Vatican to the creation of Islam." So what did all these conquests of Islam do? Well, they cleared the way for something, a resurgence, a rebirth, an enlightenment of the world, according to Rome. What was created in this rebirth? The Holy Roman Empire. In part 3 of this series, we will explore the Holy Roman Empire and its cornerstone, the Catholic Church and religion, the rule of the Vatican. I hope that you now see the connections that we have built in parts 1 and part 2 now of this series. Be prepared. Part 4 will bring all of this to a conclusion and show you the connections between everything we have studied. You may not know it now, but we are tracing the hand of something or someone through history, and it isn't just Rome. Stay tuned for part 3, and thank you for your time.